So Carlota, if you've hung around me or Anthemis for any amount of time, you've probably heard enough about Carlota. In 2002, she published a book called Technological Revolutions and Financial Capital. And it was one of those books, I'm sure you all have it, where I started highlighting, and then I got about halfway through and the whole book was like yellow and pink. And there's no point in highlighting if you highlight everything. And still today, I reread it every couple of years, and I refer back to it. But it's a great book, but it's important too because it really is the one of two or three foundational pillars of why myself and Nadeem and Amy and Uday started at what became Anthemis and left traditional finance. And it gave us a roadmap and helped us organize our thoughts about this momentous change that we were sure was going to happen, and we remain convinced is happening and will continue to happen. We're super excited that she agreed a couple years ago to become our researcher or academic in residence, and we're helping her in very modest ways, but to write her new book, which is a follow-up to that book, Beyond the Technological Revolution. I think she's going to talk about it a little bit tonight, and the work that she's doing on the social shaping of technology. Technology, I deeply believe that there is part of the universal entropy and movement forward, but do we just abdicate our responsibilities as humans, or do we have free will? Can we shape that? How should we shape that? These are questions that I think have been important forever, and now are becoming manifestly obvious that they're important. What's the future of AI? What is the future of the social contract between the haves and the have-not, and defined in many different ways, financially, educationally, intellectually. So I'm going to pass it over. So again, thank you very much, and without any further ado, I spoke too long, Carlota Perez.
Well, it's a huge pleasure to be here. There are few things in life that you do, or that you have done, that make you feel really proud. One of them is what Sean just said. To have been the person who inspired Anthemis is a huge thing. I have noticed through these years that I've been knowing Anthemis people in various circumstances, that they are all beautiful people. They are amazing. They are so sensitive. They are so human. They are so and they're in finance. I have been in contact with a lot of people in finance, and they are so self-centered. And I guess you have to be in some cases, but you've hacked finance and turned it into something else. And for me to have been the person that he constantly acknowledges as the source of what he's done, wow. It is a fantastic thing, and I'm very grateful for that, and of course extremely grateful for the help, for the support, enormous support that they're giving me for the sequel to my book. So today I'm going to try to talk to you about something which you're probably interested in. I'm going to talk about using historical experience to understand the present and construct a better future, nothing less. Quite ambitious what I'm trying to do, and I'm going to say it in a very short time. Now, I have given other talks to Anthemis. One of them is printed somewhere here. And I'm hoping that some of you who have never heard me and who have not read the book will take a look at those slides that are printed around there, and or will go to the Anthemis channel and watch one of my talks, which is there too, so that I will not have to say those same things. I will say a little bit about it, about the whole theory of how technological revolutions propagate and how they make conditions shift. So I will try to concentrate on some things that I'm going to tell you today, basically. I'm going to share with you 3 disruptive ideas. I think it's a very good thing to be in a world of disruptors and give you some disruptive ideas. First of all, that we are now in the equivalent of the 1930s. Not an easy thing to believe when we think of how terrible the 1930s were, but I think most of you know that there are a lot of people that are suffering enormously in the current circumstances. It's not by chance. Then I'm going to tell you that a global sustainable golden age could be ahead. So I'm giving you bad news and good news. And third, that markets alone will not and cannot bring that golden age, that we need the return of an active state. Now, I know very well that most hackers, that most software people, that most digital natives tend to be libertarians. I think I know why. I think you have been born into a world where the notion of the state is like this regulatory, tax, horrible, bureaucratic, heavy, unbearable, whatever thing. You want to get rid of it. And then you see all the innovators and all these wonderful people doing great things. So you say liberty and libertarianism and freedom and markets and don't, get out of my way, don't regulate and so on. I think we need to rethink. We need to look at history and see why we think that way and perhaps change our minds. And I hope I'll move you at least a little bit. And maybe some of you already agree with me. I don't know. I'll find out because I want to talk to a lot of you during this retreat. Okay, what I'm going to hold is that those three ideas stem from my research on how technological revolutions have historically evolved and on how capitalism shifts in order to face changing conditions. Capitalism isn't always the same. I know that economic theory, especially the one that's now fashionable, which is the super free market neoliberal economics, tends to think that there are universal laws and that capitalism always works the same. Well, I'm going to try to tell you today that no. Capitalism shifts, has a pendular movement. Sometimes it's more towards markets, sometimes towards the state, but the state actually creating conditions for markets. So let's see what we're seeing today in order to see if we are really in the 1930s. So as in the 1930s, the world is facing a set of challenges and threats that need urgent solutions. Stubborn unemployment and unacceptable inequality. Jobs threatened by robotics and artificial intelligence and people talking about secular stagnation. Financial world in a casino, not investing in the real economy. Bonds and new CDOs now based on student debt or automobile debt or whatever else you can do, but not really creating the new economy, the new jobs, the new truly productive economy. Violence, migrations, messianic leaders offering to make whatever great again. Return of populism, nationalism, fascism, just like in the 30s. Proliferation of local new wars. The last time we actually had a huge world war, I hope we're not going to have one now. But the thing is that there is this ferment of anger that can sometimes be from the top, trying to get rid of the migrants or whatever I'm doing, or it can be from the bottom, people really frustrated and angry and feeling disenfranchised and so on. And of course, this is also bringing migrations. The developing world is not taking off. Globalization is stalled. And of course, there is a lot, precisely the migration problem, which has to do with the wars, has to do with the poverty, has to do with the fact that all the hopes for globalization making really a difference are now not as strong as they used to be. And then we have climate change, pollution, and limits to resources, which are not a small problem. They are a huge problem. And that, of course, doesn't have necessarily to do with the 1930s, but it has to do with the mass production revolution that preceded us. But the thing is that austerity, less government, and unfettered markets have clearly failed to solve these problems. And that's because it's not the solution now. It's the wrong solution for the current problems. In fact, one would say that if a CEO of any company were to have the results that these governments have had with their policies, they would be chucked out. You wouldn't leave them in. So we've got to rethink. I would hold that our current socioeconomic problems and the environmental ones stem from the same four causes. First of all, the legacy of the previous mass production revolution. Each revolution has a character, and the mass production revolution was mainly about enormous quantities of identical products made with a lot of materials and a lot of energy to use energy in their use, like all the electrical appliances and the automobiles and all the rest, and about plastics being oil-based also and being for waste. So that's the legacy, and that's what we have now in terms of the environment, but it's also what we have now in terms of what people expect. Do you think all the Chinese people are going to be able to have the American way of life? We're talking billions of new consumers now in India, in China, and everywhere else that develops. Well, we don't have 7 planets, we have 1. And the only reason why that model was possible is because it was in a few countries. The developing world did not really participate. It was only like 5% of the population of the third world. Then we have the contradictory nature of innovation as creative destruction. Every technological revolution destroys enormous quantities of jobs, destroys enormous quantities of skills, destroys regions. Countries, whole countries and whole regions are practically destroyed because the new revolution does not need what they used to do, or because they're replacing with the new technologies. So there are victims. The question is, can we save the victims? And what has happened at other times? When in mass production, of course, when you had, how many of you have seen Charlie Chaplin's Modern Times? A few, maybe? Okay, well, the whole idea of mass production reduced the amount of workers needed for producing anything. And mechanization of agriculture reduced the amount of people needed in agriculture. So everybody was talking about secular stagnation, which, by the way, was when the term was invented, was in the 1930s, the one that's being used now. And it's because structural unemployment seemed inevitable. How could anybody believe in the 1930s that workers would have suburban houses full of electrical appliances with a car at the door, those same workers that were in the soup kitchens, really hungry and with nothing, barely where to live? So creative destruction has always happened. The question is, can we fix it by using the new technologies and overcoming it? The third cause is the decoupling of finance from production in the last decades. The first few decades of every revolution are finance-led, and they create a bubble which looks like prosperity, and therefore everybody thinks that that's the future, that's the secret. Leave finance free and it will bring us prosperity. Well, in fact, what they do is they decouple from production and they start living in a paper economy. And it's not you, of course. You are the ones who are starting to save finance from that. That's precisely what fintech is doing. It's recoupling, but the big banks are not. And the fourth cause, then, is market fundamentalism as the political and economic ideology that's inherited from bubble times. So that's precisely that ideology that makes it impossible for people to realize that in order to know how to tackle these problems, we've got to understand the way technological revolutions propagate and how the main actors, finance capital, production capital, and the state, change roles in the process. So what we're going to see a little bit of today is precisely that, to try to understand how technological revolutions propagate and how the actors change roles. We begin by something that's very important to notice. There is this feeling that technological advance is continuous, that progress just advances and we have new things and new things and new things and new things, as if they were just in a big continuum and there was no logic to them. So this is how we see it. Just technological progress has a force. But the thing is that progress does not occur continuously. It's actually about successive surges of transformation that are driven by successive technological revolutions. So that you actually get from eruption, which is each of these curves begins very slowly, then suddenly it takes off and it goes really strongly, and then at some point maturity comes and there is practically the end of the opportunities with that particular technological revolution. In that moment, then we get another revolution coming. Why does it always happen? Well, believe it or not, among other things, because finance gets divorced from the old obsolete guys and starts funding the crazy ones that are in their garage doing some crazy, in this time electronic things, before mechanical things like automobiles or whatever. J.P. Morgan, when his son said, there's this guy, Henry Ford, who's thinking of automobiles as, that people could have single cars. Oh, that's ridiculous. We are all happy with trains and horses. That's the best thing. So J.P. Morgan refused to fund this crazy guy that wanted everybody to have a car. So it's very difficult, but the son and the new guys and the venture capitalists precisely come at that point. So they are very important and it happens. Now, in this way of looking at it, there have been 5 such surges since the Industrial Revolution from 1771. And we are now halfway into the 5th. So the information revolution is the 5th revolution. Therefore, we have 4 examples to look at. We notice that what's happening now is very similar to what happened before. That's why I can tell you that we're in the 1930s. And therefore, it's good to look at history because then we can have more hope. When I say there's a golden age ahead, it's because every other time when we've been in a period similar to this one, there has been a golden age ahead. Why shouldn't it be now? Well, it won't be there if we don't do it because it doesn't happen automatically. And that's precisely what I'm working on now. Because in market economies, technical change occurs by revolutions, and because of that, capitalism experiences pendular swings every 2 or 3 decades. So what we have is some periods of installation that are led by financial capital to install a technological revolution. The whole thing, the infrastructures, the technology, and the logic, the paradigm, all that, with unfettered free markets, necessarily because when a technological revolution appears, it appears in the world of the previous revolution, and therefore, if you don't allow it to just go wherever it wants to go, it's very difficult for it to define the winners. So it is a time when experiments must be made to define the winners. And that's why unfettered free markets are important. And then, of course, unfortunately, there is also income polarization because those guys that are doing all those fantastic things are becoming millionaires. And the guys that are in the old industries that are declining are becoming poorer and poorer. So the old economy declines and the new economy, very small at first, is just moving and booming and flourishing with finance funding it. And it ends in a financial crash. We have already had 2. I think we might have a 3rd one soon. But anyway, because we're not fixing it, as long as we don't fix it, we're going to continue having bubbles and crashes. Now, when the major financial crash happens, then we have a period that can be 2 years or 13 years. Now we're already 9 years into this one. When that happens, then we have to go to the period of deployment, when we really, led by production capital and aided by government, and this is very important, it has happened each time, in order to fully deploy the new potential across the economy and society. So this is when society really gets, all of society can get to benefit from what the new technology brings. And this time, it might not just be within a few countries, it might be the whole global economy. There is enough innovation potential in the current situation of the ICT revolution to transform the whole world and to bring well-being to the whole globe. It is such an ambitious thing to do something similar to what mass production did for the advanced world. So this period of deployment ends in technological maturity, and we go back to the period of installation when financial capital leads, and we get all that disorder. So the pendulum swings when what had been working for growth before is no longer working and must be replaced. So we are at the moment when the pendulum must swing, and we're not being able to do it. Society is not necessarily proposing the model. Politicians are following big finance, and big finance, of course, is not interested at all in changing any of what's happening. My original theory of great surges was published in that book, Technological Revolutions and Financial Capital, which is the one that Sean was talking about. And now the current project, supported by Anthemis, is looking beyond the technological revolution to the social shaping of technology. So I'm moving from the role of finance to the role of the state in the diffusion and in the social assimilation of major technical change. What's the essence of the theory? The essence is that the dynamism of the capitalist economy is shaped by two interdependent but separate profit-seeking agents. They are financial capital and production capital. Neither can live without the other. If you don't have financial capital, production cannot happen. And if there is nothing to invest in, then finance shouldn't be making money. You shouldn't be making money just betting on what's going to happen in the stock market or what's going to happen with GDP or some currency or whatever, doing derivatives. You should be making money from investing in the real economy. So they are necessary, but of course they sometimes go off whack. And production capital, when it's mature, sometimes sticks to its guns, the dinosaurs, and will not move. So finance has to really push to make things happen. So it's a very complex process, but we've got to understand this business of the role changing. So during installation, finance decouples from production and ends up building a paper economy in a casino world. So when that happens and they're no longer creating wealth and the real economy, then it's time to shift. And at that time, you have deployment when, in order for it to occur, you need finance to recouple with the production economy, to stop playing around in the casino, identifying the needs of the economy and of people, and innovating to serve them. And that is what I understand you people are doing. You are the forerunners of that. You are pushing what should happen, which is that the whole of finance should become like fintech, serving the economy, really solving problems, thinking of financial wellness, thinking of what it is that society needs. Now, regulation, the tax structure, procurement policy, and the general direction given to the economy will tilt the playing field and define the most profitable role for both finance and production. A role that each will take, and with results that are that are better for society than when finance is calling the shots in a casino. State versus markets is a false dichotomy. It is not true that the market is wonderful and the state is a bureaucratic, heavy monster. unfortunately, because companies used to be bureaucratic heavy monsters. Do you know how this book about IBM, Who Says Elephants Can't Dance, the guy who actually turned IBM over, he was describing a bureaucratic organization just like the state. So there's nothing that says that the state is bureaucratic. It is the particular way of organizing things for mass production, which was fantastic for mass production, stopped being fantastic when those technologies matured, but the state did not change. So state and markets actually always work together, and the results are always some, including when the state gets out of the way. Because the thing is that markets always function in a context that's shaped by the state. Sometimes the state enables serendipity and bubbles by stepping back, and that is an action just as much as stepping in. And that's the case as in the early decades of the technological revolution, when wild experimentation is needed. It's got to happen, and therefore the state gets out of the way and things happen the way they must, and there are bad consequences, but there are also good consequences. At other times, the state fosters golden ages by providing a synergistic direction, a direction in which people can all invest and therefore get a result that provides synergy for all. So it's after bubble crashes, when big finance is risk averse, while the economy stagnates, although there is a huge innovation potential. And you people are using that innovation potential. And sometimes even the big banks copy you, which is in a way the result, apart from the fact that you people might grow yourselves. So what I'm saying is that different contexts require a different role for the state in shaping the playing field. Hands-off does not work when finance is decoupled from production as it is today. It is time for an intelligent, active state to set up a positive-sum game between business and society, to set up a new covenant, to set up a new peaceful society that is not so rift apart as it is now, so polarized. Let me just show you how increasing inequality is one of the typical consequences of the installation bubbles. This is from 1915 to 2010. You see, this is the percent of income earned by the top 1% of taxpayers, including capital gains, between those years. This is what Piketty and Sayers did. I imagine many of you are familiar with the whole inequality argument made by Thomas Piketty and Emmanuel Sayers. Okay, this is one of their graphs about income distribution. So you see here that during the Roaring 20s, which is the installation, the financial period of the mass production revolution, we get finance, the top 1% getting 25% of all income. And if we come here, the NASDAQ bubble and the 2000s bubble, again, we get to 25%. The top 1% gets 25% of income. But do you see this here? This is the golden age. This is deployment. This, of course, is just about the US, but you can do the same for any European country. Here, these people who used to get 25% are only getting 10%. Now, I'm not saying it's less money. It might be even as much money because the economy was growing so much. There was so much to bring around, to pay taxes with, to consume, and to invest, that they only got 10%. So income distribution improved enormously. This is exactly what the state coming in, because it was the welfare state that came in. So adequate policies create a profitable direction for widespread innovation and investment, creating jobs, redistributing income, and generating dynamic demand for business. Because one of the big things that makes finance think that it's very risky to invest in anything is that demand is not guaranteed. Among other things, because income polarization means that only a few people at the top really have fully disposable income, and that lots of people at the bottom are using their income actually to buy Chinese goods, because that's all they can afford. So these economies are in great trouble. So let's look at how government policy fosters golden ages. And in each case, I'm going to tell you how it did for the boom of the mass production revolution in the post-war period. Indicating a direction for profitability, they always have to do that. And the direction was suburbanization and the Cold War. So you had cheap houses on cheap land, because the automobile allowed you to get out of town. When you had railways and bicycles and horses, you only had cities and rural. You didn't have suburbia. Suburbia was precisely an innovation associated with the automobile and with the roads. And the Cold War, of course, which was all the military demand, that's where internet came from, that's where computers came from, not from the market, came from the state. Redesigning the tax and subsidy structure in that direction, high taxes provided consumer and procurement demand. So do you know what the top tax rate was in the US during the Republican government of Eisenhower in the 50s? Can you imagine the highest? I bet you cannot imagine it was 91%. 91% in the USA. Why? Because the money came out of the pocket, went into the state gave it to people in welfare and this and that, and gave it in procurement, it went right back, and then you paid taxes again, and the money came right back as demand. It was brilliant. It was good for people and it was good for business. So people paid taxes. Providing appropriate externalities, roads, phones, electricity systems, facilitating demand, the welfare state and military procurement, which is why I explained about the tax and subsidy, providing a stable economic context and social peace, official labor unions and salaries increasing with productivity. You know, at that time, everybody understood that the most important thing for them was to have as much demand as possible. So that meant the workers should also consume. So, of course, everybody else should increase the salaries and the wages of their workers so my product can sell more. So everybody wanted the others to increase salaries. Well, what happened with making labor unions official and supporting them fully was that they made sure that everybody paid more. And whenever it's the same for everybody, it doesn't affect anybody in their competitiveness. It actually makes a level playing field. And of course, modernizing the state itself, copying the best new business models. At the time, there was no difference between the way General Motors organized itself and the way the state did. Although they did it later, they always do. They come in late. So how could it do it now? Let's begin with the direction. Society today could shape the ICT revolution in a radically new direction that could be called smart green growth. Smart because it uses ICT, it's green because it's sustainable. So shifting productivity innovation from labor saving to resource saving. Up to now, we have been using energy and materials as if there is no tomorrow. Well, tomorrow came. And we've got to start worrying about it. So if they could become more expensive, either by taxes or by whatever means, it would help in order to get people to do that instead of labor saving. And maybe we shouldn't put taxes on payroll, because that means people, you don't want to employ people because you have to pay payroll taxes. That was a very good way of making companies increase productivity by adding more machines and more cheap energy to replace people. So high salaries and payroll taxes made sure that companies increased productivity, and indeed, they did increase productivity. In fact, they increased it so much that the manufacturing product increased in 20 years in the US 3 times. It tripled, and they only increased labor by 30%. So we're really talking, but the rest of the economy, all the low productivity activities increased so that you had labor multiplying by 5. Whereas in manufacturing, which is the high productivity area, it only increased by 30%, which makes us think that artificial intelligence, robotics, all these things are very important for society, because if there is a part of society that is very high productivity, the average productivity will be higher, and therefore lots of low productivity activities like care and all those things can be paid well, because average wages in a society are associated to average productivity. So having a very high productivity sector can help, as long as you're also promoting all the others. Otherwise, you just eliminate jobs and you're in trouble. Moving to renewable energy and materials, reuse, recycling. We need to do maintenance, a massive increase in the durability of tangible products, plus shifting from possession to access of goods, sharing, rental, and maintenance. Maintenance was eliminated because the whole idea was that the same people should consume 5 times in their lifetime, so you had planned obsolescence. Now we need the opposite. We need to have maintenance workers save products so that they can last a long time, and they have to be designed so that they will last. That with current technology, products could last 80 years, and we could have 3D printing to update them and upgrade them constantly. Then redefining the aspirational good life as health, creativity, experiences, networking, etc. Actually, every single technological revolution has brought a different good life. The Victorian life was a particular style of all the, with all the new manufactured things. Then we had the Belle Epoque, the cosmopolitan lifestyle. We had the American way of life, and now we could have a smart, green, sustainable way of life, global. All these things I just mentioned in this smart green growth, it's already happening. It's happening among the rich, it's happening among the educated, and among the young, and probably all of you. This is where we're moving. We're moving in that direction. However, without active support from the state, it's too slow. Why? Why does the new potential good life emerge so slowly? Why are we still trapped in wasteful consumerism and excess use of energy? The technologies are there to change from products to services. We can see it in books, in movies, in music, all the innovation that could happen in order to reduce the proportion of tangible things in lifestyles and in GDP. But it's not happening fast enough. And why? Because the legacy of the previous revolution makes each new paradigm inevitably appear wrapped in the old one. That is an automobile. That is an automobile. It's not a horse carriage. But you see, it was born in the midst of a horse-driven society. So the guy is holding the wheel in this uncomfortable way because that's how he held the reins. And the engine is under him, and it's measured in what? In horsepower. Still today, we measure in horsepower. And of course, the whole thing was made by who? By the guys who made the horse carriages. Who else? There was nobody else. So when Ford comes in and makes a different thing and puts the wheel the right way and makes a proper car, which looks exactly like cars look today, that was when we really got the new paradigm. Well, the thing is that the intelligent policies needed to change the context to overcome the crisis situation, to move politicians and overcome business resistance. Sorry. They need a crisis situation. And the crisis situation could be another huge financial collapse, could be lots of politicians, lots of countries falling under the hands of populists and all these people who are thinking that they can solve things by promising heaven. Or it could be a climatic catastrophe. Maybe New York gets flooded from a huge hurricane like what happened in New Jersey or further or something, and then they'll understand, hey, listen, we better do something. Somehow capitalism does not know how to solve its problems without going through a big crisis. It has to crash first, and then it solves. The problem is that government and the institutional framework are also trapped in the old paradigm. So how to modernize the framework for the ICT golden age? I'm going to tell you a few things, but of course we need everybody's imagination. My imagination cannot solve the problem. we've got to all think about what to do. What direction? Well, I already suggested that it could be sustainability in both production and consumption, plus full global development. And it's only if we have full global development, that apart from the humanitarian reasons, that there's going to be enough demand for everybody. There is going to be enough demand for the advanced world to produce capital goods, engineering goods, infrastructure, things like that, because mass production consumer products are already being made in Asia, and there's no way we're going to compete with that in these countries. So we need demand for that. So imagine how wonderful, just as with the workers and consumers, we had the official trade unions and if we could have full global development, we have a positive sum game between business and society, between the advanced and the emerging and developing countries. So that's one of the things we need, and of course sustainability in order to have a positive sum game with the planet. So what tax and subsidy structure? Well, we need pro-long-term investment and pro-green and pro-health. So we might, for instance, flip VAT, which is a tax on profits and salaries, and flip it to a tax on materials, energy, and transport. It's not so easy, but I'm sure information technology can solve it. So we need to go, and of course capital gains. We should have capital gains very high if you make them in one day or in a few microseconds, 90%, and then you go all the way down to 5 years, 0%, so that anybody who invests long-term doesn't pay capital gains or pays 3% or something. So which externalities? Well, obviously, internet for everybody, smart grid for electricity to be able to sell and buy electricity and to use several sources and so on, plug-in charging for automobiles, and a modern education system. Our education system is trapped in the old mold. It's like making sausages. You come from kindergarten to PhD, and you come out at some point and you come with a seal on your head, you know, you are now this and you are now that. And we need people who have portfolio careers, who do one thing today, another thing tomorrow, who have done many things, who have different experiences, who can recycle, who can learn things in institutions or not. Universities should be open to anybody who's working. You should be able to pay for one course. You don't have to be doing an MSc or a PhD or something. You should be able to go, and it would be good for universities. People would pay for that, and we would get higher quality classes and so on. Facilitating demand, again, I just said before, full global development, but also probably something like basic income, because the current welfare state is completely unsuited for the situation. We have the gig economy, we have 0 hours contracts, we have entrepreneurial things, we have self-employed people. All those people, how are they going to go and say, look, I'm unemployed, I don't get enough money from the jobs I do because I have sometimes a contract. Therefore, you know, am I unemployed? Am I employed? I don't know. Nobody knows. In the installation period, financial bubble prosperity, or the deployment period, the golden age, the nature of innovation is different. In installation periods, innovation is basic, it's exploratory, it's defined by supply. You decide what you want to produce, and you take it to the market and see if people want it. And that's what happened with computers. You know, when people talked about personal computers, I was already in my 30s. I thought they might be pretty useless. It's really amazing. It's really amazing. You know, when even faxes, when they talked about faxes, it looked like it, you know, maybe the Japanese because and the Chinese because they have all these graphic things. So it's so easy to be silly about that, not to understand the enormous potential. So people push crazy ideas and then you discover. But in the deployment period, what you do is transformative apps. You apply the technology to the whole of needs. So you're actually responding to needs, either things that are already being done and you're going to do it differently, or things that you see that could be a need, and then you cover it. You invent the need. But even though it's supply pushed, it's because you recognize the need. Whereas, you know, when you invented computers or microprocessors or whatever, the limit of what you could think of was very was very restricted. When we come to the innovation question, people would say, what can I do with this new tech? What can this new tech do? That's what happens in the installation period. When you come to the deployment period, what need can I fulfill better with new tech? So you're using new tech, but it's always in terms of a need that's somehow expressed or being fulfilled in another way. Then you come to the innovation target. It's the new tech itself. It's to create new needs, actually, and new solutions. But in the deployment period, all industries, all services, all activities, lifestyles, everything is there to be reshaped following the new paradigm. So Uber has to be somehow regulated so that people don't suffer consequences. But it's a very intelligent solution. And so is Airbnb. And we'll see what happens to hotels. And, to stop those technologies is silly. What you've got to do is to shape the context and shape the conditions so that they are fair for the people who use it and for the people who work in it. And then the result of innovation, the result in the installation period is a new transformative potential. So what you get at the end when the bubble crashes is that you have a quantum leap in productivity, in offer, and in quality also across the board. So you're offering this possibility. So what is the result of innovation in deployment? It's a new economy, it's new ways of living, and when it happens, it becomes so normal. It just becomes the normal way of being. But without real help, it doesn't happen, without state help. And financial innovation becomes one of the most important enablers of the golden age. Can you imagine the mass production world without consumer credit? You needed mortgages for people, for normal people to have mortgages. In fact, the state provided Fannie Mae in the 30s so that banks could lend to people with salaries without fear. It was insurance. And consumer credit allowed people to buy big ticket, to buy a car with a salary, to buy a refrigerator with a salary, to buy a house with a salary. And unemployment insurance was there because even if people had jobs for life, or suppose that they had jobs for life, every so often they might have 3 or 4 or 5 months without. And can you imagine every time there was a recession and people were put out, that they would return the key of the house and return the key of the car and return the refrigerator? It would have been catastrophic. So unemployment insurance was a fantastic positive sum game for business and people at the same time. The fintech entrepreneurs are already doing deployment type innovation, solving real problems of consumers and businesses. I know that's what you're doing. The problem is that the obsolete institutional context still favors the bureaucratic banks. It's made for them, it was made for them, and it hasn't really changed, except for taking away some of the regulations that maybe should still be there. And those banks are the strongest defenders of the small, inactive state. It was the state that bailed the banks out with tons of money and then poured more money with quantitative easing to strengthen them. What has the state done to favor fintech disruption and real solutions? Do you think it has done something? What could it do? Let's talk about it. In fact, I want to ask you all to approach me if you have any ideas about bad things that the state is doing for fintech, good things that the state is doing for fintech, good things that the state could do for fintech. Because I need to gather all that. In fact, I'm planning to have a workshop in November, and maybe some of you that might have ideas, strong ideas about that could attend. I would like to know people who might want to come. Because the whole thing is that if we don't propose, if the proposals are not on the table when the problem comes and the decisions are to be made, they're not on the table. So we need to put them all on the table. And of course, I cannot know what you need. How can I propose things that are good for fintech? So, thank you. And if you want some more about this, there is my webpage, there is the page of the project Beyond the Tech Revolution, and there is my Twitter, which sometimes announces this or that. So thank you very much.